4 directions, 90 seconds, 1 target. That's all it took to silence the guns feeding 3 separate sectors of the southern front. This is the story of how a Ukrainian multi-vector drone strike took apart a Russian ammunition depot buried deep behind the lines. A depot supplying artillery barrages, glide bomb sorties, and armored pushes across a stretch of front that had bled both sides for months. A depot that Russian logistics planners thought was invisible. Camouflaged, ringed with air defense. Safe. It wasn't safe. It was a target. When Ukrainian strike packages arrived from the north, south, east, and west within the same 90-second window, they didn't just destroy a warehouse. They triggered a chain of secondary detonations so massive that the fireball showed up on satellite imagery. The shockwave rattled windows in villages 6 kilometers away. And for days afterward, the guns that had hammered Ukrainian positions went quiet. I'm your host at East Alert, where we analyze the battles that change wars. Tonight, we're going behind the strike. Past the dramatic footage of fire columns rising into the night sky. Past the headlines and the tallies of destroyed crates and incinerated artillery rounds. We're going into the planning. The reconnaissance. The weeks of patience before a single drone flew toward that tree line. What happened at that depot wasn't luck. It wasn't improvisation. It was modern Ukrainian intelligence methodology applied with surgical patience and executed with timing precision that most conventional militaries can only achieve on a training range. The southern front had settled into a particular rhythm in the months before the strike. Russian artillery units supporting operations along the Zaporizhzhia and eastern Donetsk axes were firing at sustained rates. Not the saturation barrages of the early war, but consistent, methodical fire support that kept Ukrainian infantry pinned and made counterattack preparation brutally costly. Somewhere behind that fire was a logistics node, a central point where rail-delivered ammunition was consolidated, sorted, and forwarded to frontline artillery parks. Ukrainian reconnaissance had been tracing the supply architecture for weeks, watching resupply convoys, logging transit times from railhead to firing position, correlating incoming round volume with artillery activity along specific sectors. The depot sat in a wooded belt roughly 40 kilometers behind the contact line, not directly on a rail spur. That would have been too obvious, too easy to target with ballistic fire. Instead, it occupied a clearing at the end of a secondary road network, hidden beneath camouflage netting, stretched between mature pine trees. Satellite imagery showed the outline only in specific lighting conditions. Thermal sensors overflying at high altitude during pre-dawn hours caught vehicle engine heat signatures. A depot that came alive at dawn and went quiet at dusk. That pattern was the first intelligence anchor. Ukrainian reconnaissance drones, medium-altitude platforms with optical and thermal payloads, had been cycling over the area for weeks, not daily. Not in a pattern that Russian air defense operators could predict and intercept. Sporadic. Patient. Each pass added detail to the operational picture without revealing that a picture was being assembled. By the time the strike was authorized, Ukrainian intelligence had logged over 3 weeks of observation data. They knew the truck schedule. They knew which mornings saw peak activity. They knew that the air defense assets protecting the depot, a pair of short-range systems positioned at the woodline edge, had a gap in their radar coverage arcs, a gap created by the terrain. One the Russian air defense crew either hadn't noticed or hadn't reported. Which weapon was deadlier in this operation? A. HIMARS precision strike? B. Coordinated FPV drone swarm? C. Loitering munitions? Comment your answer below. We'll break down the actual employment sequence in detail. The gap was narrow. Roughly 18 degrees of azimuth, low-angle approach from the northeast. Barely enough for a single drone to thread through without triggering the search radar. But the Ukrainian strike package wasn't planning to use the gap as a transit route. They were planning to use it as a distraction. Planning took 11 days from target confirmation to strike authorization. During that period, analysts cross-referenced optical imagery with electronic intelligence. Radio emissions from the depot's coordination net, fuel consumption patterns inferred from vehicle thermal signatures, personnel movement schedules that suggested shift changes and meal times. The result was a target package that included not just the depot's location, but its internal layout. Storage bays arranged along a central axis, a vehicle marshalling area at the eastern end, a generator and communications node at the northern edge, and the main ammunition storage structure, the primary target, at the western end of the compound, farthest from the road approach. Russian logistics planners had presumably positioned their most valuable asset there to give it the longest possible warning time if a conventional artillery strike came from the front. That placement worked against them. The western end was the least protected point from an aerial approach. Stay with me. What unfolds in the next section is the operational mechanism behind the 90-second window, and it reveals something about Ukrainian drone doctrine that Russia still hasn't fully adapted to counter. The strike package had 4 elements, each launching from a different direction, each with a different flight profile, each arriving at a precisely calculated time on target. Element Alpha launched from northeast of the depot, through the radar gap. 3 loitering munitions, medium payload, assigned to engage the air defense systems first, not destroy them, distract them. Force the radar operators into active tracking mode, which would reveal their radar emissions to Ukrainian electronic warfare assets and confirm the gap was still viable. Element Bravo launched from the south. 6 FPV drones, each carrying a warhead optimized for soft target destruction. Targets: the vehicle marshalling area and adjacent fuel storage. Burning vehicles would create secondary fires. Igniting fuel would generate thermal chaos that overwhelmed targeting systems, and burning vehicles block escape routes. Element Charlie launched from the west, directly into the main ammunition storage structure. 4 strike drones, heavy warheads. Their flight path ran low, below radar coverage, using terrain masking along a shallow river valley parallel to the depot's western boundary. The valley added 3 minutes to the flight time, which was exactly why Element Charlie launched first. Element Delta launched from the east. 2 precision-guided munitions targeting the communications node and generator at the northern edge. Blind the command. Cut the power. Eliminate the ability to coordinate a response or call for reinforcement. 4 elements. 4 different launch times, calculated backward from a single time-on-target moment, all arriving within 90 seconds of each other. The timing math wasn't simple. Each element had a different speed profile. Each traversed a different distance. Weather, wind, speed, and direction at altitude was integrated into the calculation in real time, with launch times adjusted on the day of the strike based on meteorological data. If the wind shifted significantly before launch, the entire timing matrix needed recalculation. It shifted. 40 minutes before the first element was scheduled to launch, wind at medium altitude increased and rotated 7 degrees. The Ukrainian coordination team, working from a forward command element with communication links to each launch position, recalculated in 23 minutes. Adjusted launch times were transmitted. Operators confirmed. Nobody planned for that obstacle. The fact that the team solved it in under half an hour says something about the training level and situational adaptability of Ukrainian drone units at this stage of the war. Element Charlie launched first, at 3:17 a.m. local time. 4 drones threading the river valley in single file, flying below 10 meters above the water surface to defeat radar. Cold night, low humidity. Good optical conditions for the infrared seekers that would guide the final approach. Element Alpha launched at 3:24 a.m. 3 loitering munitions climbing to medium altitude, approaching from the northeast through the radar gap. At that moment, the Russian air defense crew was in a scheduled radar-off period, a technique to reduce electronic emissions and prevent detection by Ukrainian anti-radiation assets. The pause ran every 40 minutes on a predictable schedule. Ukrainian electronic intelligence had logged it across multiple observation nights. The radar-off period was supposed to last 8 minutes. Element Alpha was timed to arrive during that window. Element Bravo launched at 3:31 a.m. 6 FPV drones, low and fast, following the southern approach terrain. Their operators worked from a forward relay station that extended control range. One of the operational adaptations Ukrainian FPV units had developed over months of frontline experience. Standard commercial FPV systems have a control range of roughly 3 kilometers. Relay extensions push that to 12. At 12 kilometers from the target, the operators flew their approach in relative safety, outside effective range of Russian close-in air defense systems. Element Delta launched at 3:33 a.m. The precision munitions were the highest speed element of the package, requiring the shortest flight time. They were held back until the last moment specifically to minimize the window in which Russian radar operators, coming back online after their scheduled pause, might acquire them before time on target. At 3:41 a.m., Element Charlie arrived at the main ammunition storage structure. First drone impacted the northern wall. The warhead penetrated the outer berming. a dirt berm that Russian engineers had built around the structure, presumably to protect against overpressure from nearby explosions. It wasn't designed to stop a direct impact drone warhead. The second drone entered through the penetration created by the first. Third drone targeted the roof. Fourth drone flew a racetrack pattern overhead for battle damage assessment, transmitting video in real time to the coordination element. The first secondary detonation came 11 seconds after first impact. It started with propellant. Artillery propellant charges stored in metal containers that the initial blast had scattered across the storage floor. The explosion's heat ignited them. Propellant burns differently from explosive filler. It burns fast and generates pressure. The pressure inside the partially enclosed storage structure spiked in a fraction of a second. The roof came off. Not damaged. Off. The overpressure event lifted the entire roof structure, reinforced concrete and steel sheeting, vertically, and it came back down at an angle, partially crushing the eastern storage bay and exposing the main ammunition stacks to open air. At 3:4119 a.m., 19 seconds after first impact, the ammunition stacks ignited. How many vehicles did the strike ultimately account for? A 23B-38 C-50? We'll give you the confirmed answer at the end. Keep watching. What followed wasn't a single explosion. It was a cascade. Artillery shell filler, typically TNT-based or RDX compounds, requires a significant initiating shock to detonate rather than simply burn. But when multiple rounds are stacked in proximity and one detonates, the shock wave from that detonation is more than sufficient to initiate adjacent rounds. The cascade propagated through the storage structure in waves, each wave larger than the last as it reached denser stacking areas. Within 40 seconds of the initial impact, the main storage structure had ceased to exist as a structure. What remained was a crater roughly 18 meters in diameter and 4 meters deep, surrounded by a debris field extending 60 meters in every direction. Element Alpha arrived at 3:4131 a.m., 31 seconds after the first impact. By then, the Russian air defense crew had just come back online after their radar pause and was rebooting their system. The radar on cycle requires about 45 seconds from cold start to operational search mode. They were 20 seconds into that cycle. Their radar wasn't operational. Element Alpha's loitering munitions found the two air defense vehicles with optical seekers and executed terminal guidance without radar interference. Both air defense vehicles were struck. One was destroyed outright, the vehicle and its launch assembly. The second was damaged, its radar antenna disabled by shrapnel from a near miss, its crew forced to abandon the vehicle. Element Bravo arrived at 3:4147 a.m. The marshalling area, already lit by fire from the storage structure, offered clear optical contrast for the FPV operators. 6 drones executed their attack run. Operators watching through their goggles from 12 kilometers away acquired targets in sequence. 4 trucks in the marshalling area, 1 fuel tanker, 1 mobile repair vehicle that had apparently moved into the compound earlier that evening. Each FPV operator selected a separate vehicle. 4 trucks burned. The fuel tanker's detonation added a column of black smoke to the already significant fire. The repair vehicle was struck on its second pass. The first operator missed because the vehicle was moving, which suggested the driver was trying to flee. He didn't get far. Element Delta arrived at 3:4209 a.m. The communications, node, and generator went dark at 3:4211 a.m. What do you think? Could Russia have designed a depot layout that would have survived a coordinated multi-vector attack like this? Comment your tactical assessment below. At 3:4211 a.m., the depot was operationally non-functional. The main ammunition store was a crater. Air defense was degraded. Vehicle transport capability was gone. Communications were severed. Power was out. 93 seconds from first impact. The fireball from the secondary detonations was photographed by a commercial satellite on its scheduled morning pass. The imagery showed a thermal plume extending several kilometers downwind. The crater was clearly visible in high-resolution optical imagery. Satellite-based analysis confirmed the scope of destruction. Multiple combustion events, significant structural collapse, debris scatter, consistent with large-caliber munitions detonating in proximity. Ukrainian General Staff reporting, consistent with OSINT analysis of the satellite imagery, assessed the depot as having contained several days of artillery supply for the sector. The destruction didn't just eliminate the physical inventory, it disrupted the supply chain itself. Trucks scheduled to collect from the depot that morning had nowhere to collect from. Artillery units expecting resupply that day received none. Fire missions scheduled for the following 48 hours were either canceled or executed at reduced capacity. Artillery fire along the sector dropped measurably in the days after the strike. Ukrainian positions that had been under sustained fire saw a significant reduction in incoming rounds. Frontline units noticed the quiet, not silence. Russian forces had reserve stocks and could draw from adjacent sectors. But the effect was immediate and lasted several days until alternative supply routes could be established. If you believe precision targeting and intelligence-driven operations are the future of warfare, type East Alert in the comments, because this is what that future looks like in practice. The Russian response took several forms, none operationally effective in the short term. Within hours of the strike, Russian electronic warfare assets increased emissions in the sector, apparently attempting to degrade Ukrainian drone communication links and prevent follow-up strikes. The surge was consistent with a command-level concern that the depot strike was the first element of a broader Ukrainian interdiction campaign rather than an isolated event. That concern wasn't entirely wrong. Intercepted Russian communications, assessed with moderate confidence by Ukrainian intelligence, indicated significant friction between Logistics Command and the Artillery Brigade Command that had been relying on the destroyed depot. Artillery commanders were requesting emergency resupply. Logistics Command was attempting to redirect from alternate depots further from the contact line, which increased transit time and exposure to interdiction along the supply route. The alternate route ran through an area Ukrainian strike systems had already surveilled. Convoys using it would be visible, trackable, potentially targetable. Russian logistics responded by reverting to nighttime convoy movement, standard practice early in the conflict that had become less necessary as Russian air defense expanded. Nighttime movement reduced productivity. Truck numbers per convoy were limited to maintain spacing. Overall resupply rates dropped during the transition period. Meanwhile, Russian engineers at the destroyed depot faced a cleanup and reconstitution challenge that would take weeks rather than days. The crater needed filling before any new structure could be built. The destroyed air defense vehicles needed replacement, and any new depot construction in the same area would need to account for demonstrated vulnerability to multi-vector drone attack. That meant either stronger hardening, deeper berms, reinforced overhead cover, or geographic dispersal of the storage function into multiple smaller nodes. Hardening adds time and construction resources. Dispersal adds logistical complexity. Both impose costs on Russian operational planning. This is the deeper consequence of a strike like this. It's not just the ammunition that was destroyed. It's the entire forward storage concept that was called into question. Every similar depot within drone range of the front line became a potential target. Russian logistics officers who had felt comfortable with the air defense protection around their facilities suddenly had to consider whether that protection was sufficient against a strike package specifically designed to defeat it. They didn't have an immediate answer. That uncertainty has operational costs. What would NATO Doctrine have done differently with the same intelligence picture? Would dispersal have been the answer, or concentrated defense? Comment your analysis below. The tactical lessons from this strike are worth stating clearly, because the doctrine it demonstrates is being studied and adapted across multiple military establishments. First, air defense saturation through sequencing. The strike didn't try to overwhelm Russian air defense with simultaneous threats from a single direction. It forced the radar to choose between multiple problems at multiple azimuths. When a radar operator has to choose between an inbound threat from the northeast and one from the south, reaction time degrades. When a third threat arrives from the west and a fourth from the east within the same engagement window, the system, however capable, faces a problem that exceeds its simultaneous engagement capacity. Second, timing precision as a force multiplier. The 90-second window wasn't arbitrary. It was calculated to ensure that secondary detonations from the ammunition store would still be generating thermal and optical confusion, affecting both Russian sensor systems and human situational awareness when subsequent elements arrived. The chaos of the first impact was weaponized as cover for the follow-on strikes. Third, radar schedule exploitation. The 40-minute radar off cycle that Russian air defense operators used as an emissions control measure became the single most exploitable vulnerability in the entire depot defense scheme. Ukrainian intelligence logged it. Ukrainian planners incorporated it. The entire timing matrix for Element Alpha was built around arriving during that 8-minute window. Russian air defense doctrine, inherited substantially from Soviet-era procedures, has historically emphasized emission control as a survivability measure. In an environment where Ukrainian anti-radiation missiles have proven capable of homing on active radars, reducing emissions makes sense. But it creates predictable vulnerability windows. And in the modern intelligence environment, where Ukrainian reconnaissance assets persistently surveil areas of interest, predictable patterns become exploitable patterns. Fourth, the dispersed launch architecture. By operating from 4 separate launch positions, the Ukrainian strike package denied Russian forces the option of a preemptive strike against a staging area. There was no single point of failure. Each element was independently operable. If one had been detected and engaged before launch, the remaining 3 would still have arrived at the target, degraded but still capable of significant effect. Real tactics. Real consequences. East alert. Now, the answer to the question we posed earlier. How many vehicles did the strike ultimately account for? The answer is B, 38 vehicles. This figure, compiled from satellite imagery analysis, Ukrainian General Staff reporting, and OSINT cross-referencing of vehicle thermal signatures logged in pre-strike reconnaissance, encompasses the trucks in the marshalling area, the fuel tanker, the repair vehicle, the 2 air defense vehicles, and the support and logistics vehicles present on site at the time of the strike. The vehicle count matters not just as a metric of destruction, but as an indicator of depot activity level. 38 vehicles at a single site in the pre-dawn hours suggests either an imminent large-scale resupply push, which the strike preempted, or the tail end of a major delivery cycle. Either way, the timing caught the depot at peak loading. The primary question the strike raises is whether this operational pattern, multi-vector, timing-synchronized drone strike against a defended logistics node, represents a replicable doctrine or a one-time event enabled by unusually favorable intelligence conditions. The evidence points toward the former. Ukrainian drone units have consistently demonstrated the ability to adapt commercial systems to military purposes, integrate intelligence with strike planning in compressed timelines, and execute complex coordinated operations at a tempo that conventional military doctrine would associate with much larger headquarters and longer planning cycles. The fact that a wind shift 40 minutes before launch was accommodated with a 23-minute recalculation reflects a planning culture that prepares for uncertainty rather than relying on rigid preset timelines. Russia hasn't developed a comprehensive tactical answer to this pattern. More radar off cycles make air defense more vulnerable to direct attack. More radar on time makes it more vulnerable to anti-radiation missiles. Dispersing ammunition stocks reduces the value of any single strike but multiplies the reconnaissance and logistics burden. Concentrating stocks maximizes efficiency but maximizes vulnerability. There's no clean solution. And that asymmetry, where the attacker designs the problem and the defender has to solve it, is the defining characteristic of this phase of the war. 3 questions for you. Was the 4-vector simultaneous approach the right call? Or would a sequential strike have let Ukrainian forces assess damage and redirect follow-on assets more effectively? Could Russian logistics have structured the depot differently? Deeper hardening? Reduced vehicle density? More frequent stock rotation? To survive this type of strike? And what would you have done as the Ukrainian strike package commander when that wind shift arrived 40 minutes before launch? Drop your answers in the comments. We read every serious tactical analysis. Subscribe to East Alert, because we break down the battles that textbooks will study for decades. The tree line is quiet now. The crater has been photographed, analyzed, and logged. The smoke has cleared. But the supply chain that ran through that depot hasn't been fully repaired. And somewhere in a Russian logistics headquarters, an officer is writing a report explaining how a position 40 kilometers deep, protected by air defense, camouflaged from satellite observation, running on a predictable schedule designed to reduce emissions, was taken apart in 93 seconds. The wrecks remain. In modern warfare, predictability is the most dangerous vulnerability of all. Stay vigilant.